Okay guys, this week's video is actually going to be pretty short. There's only really a couple of concepts that we need to go over before you guys are ready for the 6 weeks test. The first one is relative pronouns. Now they're called relative pronouns because they will introduce a dependent clause and they'll relate it back to the main clause in the sentence. So there are really two kinds of relative pronouns. There are the relative pronouns that relate back to people and the relative pronouns that relate back to things. Words like who, whoever, whomever. When you use those, you're talking about a person. When you use words like which, what, whichever, and whatever, you're using that to refer back to a thing. That is kind of a special relative pronoun, and that one you can actually use for both. You could use that to relate to a person or that to relate to a thing. Let me show you what I'm talking about. What you will see a relative pronoun doing is it's kind of like a subordinating conjunction. It will relate back to an independent clause. So a relative pronoun will start a dependent clause, and that dependent clause will relate back to the main clause. So here are a couple of examples. Maya, who hires interns, is the person to ask. And so in this case, when you use who, that's a relative pronoun relating back to Maya. It starts this dependent clause, who hires interns. And you'll see this fairly commonly, that a dependent clause that starts with a relative pronoun, rather than being before or after the independent clause, it will actually split the independent clause in the middle. So the actual independent clause that could be its own sentence is Maya is the person to ask. And we've split that by adding who hires interns. Okay? Now that is a clause because it does have a subject and a verb. The subject is a pronoun rather than a noun. And that's pretty much what you can expect to see here. The surgery, which took 3 hours, was successful. Again, the independent clause, which could stand on its own, was the surgery was successful. We split that and add the dependent clause, which took 3 hours. Okay? And in this case, most of the time when you see dependent clauses that start with a relative pronoun, they're usually adjective clauses, or sometimes even noun clauses, but most of the time adjective clauses, which will give more information back to the word that it's related back to. Okay? So which took 3 hours is an adjective clause talking about the surgery, and who hires interns is an adjective clause talking about Maya. Okay. You will see a couple of those on the 6 weeks test. The last thing, and we've kind of briefly talked about this when we reviewed parts of speech, but we just wanted to make sure that you knew this concept, and that is basic verb tenses. Okay. Now we will talk about another verb tense a little bit later, but for this 6 weeks test, we just wanted to make sure that you knew progressive tenses. We felt pretty good that you would know past, present, and future tense of a verb if the verb is go. Okay? The past tense, I went. The present tense, I go. And the future tense, I will go. We just use the linking verb will to indicate future tense there. But with progressive tense, what we mean with progressive tense is the action is still happening right now in the sentence. So what you'll see often is am with the ing form of the verb. I am going or they are going. Okay? So that right there indicates progressive tense of the verb. And that's really all you need to know. We'll have phrases, we'll have clauses, we'll have parts of speech, and we'll have relative pronouns and progressive tense of verbs. And if you are comfortable with those concepts, you'll be successful on this 6 weeks test. Good luck.